Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today. And I hope you filled out the poll for Noor and Nasir. I would like to introduce you all to Holly. Holly is from Austin Film Society, and she's been a friend of Indie Meme for many years. And I would also, and Holly, if you could turn your camera on. And I would also like to introduce the filmmaker who some of you may have met at the tables, Arun Karthick. And Arun, thank you so much for sharing your genius with us. You're on mute.
Hi, hello everyone.
Hello, thank you so much, Indie Meme. Arun, it's such an honor to meet you, and hello to everybody in the room. I'm really honored to be here tonight. I'm Holly Herrick from Austin Film Society, and to talk about NASIR, which I found to be profoundly moving and beautifully executed film, and I'm just really excited to talk to you about it, Arun. And thank you so much to Indie Meme and the whole team for having me this evening. So Arun, good morning. You just told us it was about 7:30 in the morning there. So just so happy to have you to start your day here with us in Austin at Indie Meme.
I'm glad to start my day like this.
So you've given us this is your second feature film. You have set it actually in a province and in a town that you know very well. We feel so immersed in this highly specific world, but then the themes are incredibly relevant to what we're going through in the United States and what many provinces and regions around the world are experiencing. But I noticed that it was adapted from a short story. So I wanted you to talk about the source material and a little bit about your motives with adaptation.
So after I had made my first feature, I was working on another script, and then suddenly there was this mob violence that happened in my locality. A right-wing politician was killed, and everybody suddenly thought it must have been the local Muslims who had done that. So the next morning, so around 700 to 800 people, they got together, these right-wing extremists, and they started breaking down shops in that whole long road. For over 3 to 4 kilometers, there was a rally, and that rally was full of violence. So, and having witnessed that reality, I thought it took me back to a short story which I had read few years back. And when I had read that short story, I thought, okay, this is a very interesting short story because it comes into a form which I kind of personally like to engage with. That is through feeling a person, or by following a person, you get to also know about a lot more than that person. You'll get to know about the locality, and I found that form and the character very interesting. And I had immediately spoken to the writer and told someday I'd make it. But then in 2016, when this particular riot happened, then I thought, okay, I mean, it's high time, because right from 2014, when the right-wing government in India had taken up, there have been numerous instances of public violence and all of this. And also in my city, 2 decades back in Coimbatore, where I'm from, there was a bomb blast. And after the bomb blast, there was a very nasty riot where more than 40-50 people were killed on the road. So all of these memories of these things past being repeated and just coming back to me, and I thought, okay, this is like a sign, and I should take this short story up, and I should immerse myself and start trying to make it. So that was the point. I really again connected with the writer and told him, like, I'm going to do this as my next film, and I need your permission. And he said gladly, because he is also from the same city. And one of the things that I actually liked a lot from the story, besides the characterization, was that every space that was described in the short story were spaces that I had myself as a child, as an adolescent, been. For the shops, the sari shops, the bazaar streets, where you see, I mean, are places where my mom took us to buy clothes. Whenever we want to buy clothes for our functions, that is where we go, because that's the lower middle class like shopping place basically for Coimbatore. And of course, there are these bigger shops and malls and all that. But my parents are still from a different generation who go to bazaars to shop. So also all the smaller locations, the lanes and the school per se that was described in the story. So all that is the school that I studied. The school that you saw in the film where he goes to deliver lunch boxes, the school that I studied. It's also the school that my mom taught She's a teacher. It's also the school where the writer also studied. So there were a lot of common connections which kind of immersed me more into the story and thought that, okay, probably I can express it. So when I decided that I'd do the story, I immediately took up a house in the locality, in that Muslim locality. Basically, I'm not from the city of Coimbatore. I live 20, 22 kilometers away from the city and near a village. But I thought like I shouldn't go and visit my location. I should live there to understand it. So I took up a house there, and for about 2.5 years, I lived there, and I slowly did my pre-production, trying to understand because every community is different. Even though you might think that you know them, there are always nuances that you can always pick up by living with them. So I think all the locations and the choices of the locations and the choices of cast and all that came from my time that was spent in the space per se. So yeah.
It's really remarkable, and some of the comments are saying just how intimate the film is, and clearly it's that process that you went through. But also, I'm just so impressed by the editing here. This is such the film does what so many great films that are short stories do, which is sort of you're so economical with what we see and what we hear, and even though the film is quiet, it moves so quickly in a way. And so I just wanted you to talk about that sort of approach to kind of meditative cinema, but that's sort of moving at a very economically, and that you're kind of using everything that you have to build that.
Yeah, it comes from a kind of a outlook towards cinema that I have been kind of nurturing, that you don't have to say a lot to say something. You can actually, it is better said with in a more efficient way when you have something lesser. Also, my cinematographer, while we were discussing the film on set, we were talking about how less is more. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes less is more. So, and especially when you're dealing with sensitive films as such, it's you have to be very careful about not trying to over establish things or justify things. Sometimes you just have to look at life, and certain evocations of life can present itself in ways where people can understand things. You don't have to overemphasize things. So, and also the conversation between my cinematographer, my editor, and myself through emails, because they're all from different parts of India. So that enriched our understanding of the film, understanding of the story and how one should film. And we don't have the habit of taking films up for reference or anything. But one thing that my editor said, the only film that he probably told me to think of was A Passion of Joan of Arc by Dreyer, which he kind of he used that example to elucidate the economy of shot taking and how to create the world of a film. Sometimes you don't need too many things to create the world. You need a very specific point of view, and you need to stick to your point of view, and you need to explore the devices at hand, the camera, the sound primarily, and the actors and faces and gestures and close-ups. And so I kind of took this thing from Dreyer as to how to use the close-up to kind of build up the world of the narrative. So that is probably that's the only film probably we spoke about in terms of cinematic research. But otherwise, it was mostly from the space itself, like our choice of locations and our choice of actors and the choice of dialogues would already limit us to economical way of telling. Because when we embrace the concept less is more, then you already start thinking of having more efficient things in less. If I'm going to use 2 shots, then it becomes all the more important what those 2 shots are going to be, and you have to say what you want to say in those 2 shots. So you end up thinking a lot and about the 2 shots. You end up talking a lot about the 2 shots, and I'm glad when people say that they can feel what you wanted to say in those 2 shots.
Amazing. So yeah, I love the onion peel of the information and how you're never in a hurry to sort of set up what the relationships are. And we learn towards the end of the film the real relationship between Iqbal and the parents. And I also love that there's these layers. There's the layers of the everyday, the action, and then sort of this dreamscape that we enter either through the poetry or through the Iqbal when he's in bed and we see the fish. And I think and also the dreaming itself, like when they're asleep. Can you talk about working in those 2 modes and sort of what that means narratively for you?
Yeah. So, since the story, actually, the one of the most interesting parts about the original short story is that it's written in second person, and very few stories are written in second person, because the whole story, right from the first line to the last line, when you read it, you become the character. For instance, the first line would be like, "You are as of yet sleeping, and your wife is cooking in the kitchen, and now you wake up." Or, so I wanted to kind of translate it visually, and I don't want to shoot point of view all the time. And how do you bring this closeness that comes in a second person form? So we were thinking of different ways of filming things, and one was obviously the choice of the aspect ratio, which we thought would add to the world of the film. Where the mundane could actually be turned into a little more interesting way, because I think the same image. In the same focal length in a different frame size would make you feel differently. But when you present it in a certain way, even mundane actions or in certain focal lengths, when you look at it in a closer way, and when you treat it very closely with sound, when you feel like you're there, then you're no more seeing the mundane as a distant thing, and it's no more boring. At the same time, since the story is in itself realistic, we don't want to go for a documentary realistic approach. We want to also have this dynamic play of of, of, of things, of sounds. And so in that sense, the dream world of Iqbal, which is his inner world, and the so-called imaginary poetry world of Nasir, and the external reality, kind of, I don't know how well it's blended, but in a way that I think it's that you don't feel bored by the mundaneness, because we couldn't have made this into a thriller film, because it's an ordinary day. It's an ordinary day, and you'd never know who the antagonist is until the end, when he walks to the next lane. So there's no point of setting up things. You can't set up things, and setting up things would be like us waiting for him to die, and which is not the point of the film. It's to see how he lives, and then what comes as a shock to him is also comes as a surprise to the audience, because it's a surprise to the character himself. It's not something that he himself determined or he knew or anything. So we had to take into account all these things where you can't set this film up. And also, one thing that came out of our discussions was, it's not just Nasir's today. The film should feel like it was like Nasir's yesterday and Nasir's tomorrow is like this. So how do you talk about yesterday, today, and tomorrow in one singular way? Because we have to narrate a day, but you need to also bring in what his yesterday was and how his tomorrow would be. So when we thought along those lines, we thought, okay, just to make the camera, my cinematographer came up with this very interesting metaphor that the camera could be like an angel. It neither completely participates with him, or neither is too distant, but it's kind of observing him very closely. Yeah, I mean, that metaphor was very interesting, that to treat the camera like an angel, where the camera is always there. It's always at one vantage point, looking at things, intervene in the life and help you, because it's not a real thing, but at the same time, it can be with you in at points.
Something you said about the fact that it's not the film doesn't suggest its ending, and we're not supposed to. It's not a thriller. It makes me think also how effective that is at putting at suggesting that this is a person within these circumstances, which makes it really universal. Like, we cannot control the world that we live in today, and so I think few filmmakers do that. It's more like fate is coming down with you, but this is really anti-fate. It's like fate is our existence.
It's also chance, and it's randomness, because one of the things that I thought of, that I think is the most powerful part of the short story, is the randomness of violence. Because not all Muslims who walk are always killed. It's just a wrong guy at the wrong time, in the wrong place. So it's and that's the sad thing about life. Like, when a public violence happens, it's not a planned thing as to who gets hurt. Which is the worst thing about public violence and lynching and all that, because nothing is planned. Neither the perpetrators nor the victims. It's not planned. It's just whoever happens to be there will naturally be affected by it, and that's the tragic part of it. The randomness of the violence is actually more violent than the physical act of violence itself.
So yes, truly horrible. You talk a little bit about the sound design, which I just found so interesting throughout the film, because, I would think that that street, with what we're seeing, it would be noisy, or, you would hear more, but you've chosen to kind of isolate what we're hearing. And tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, one thing that my sound designer Gautam Nair, what he felt was, I mean, there are so many things in a city, right? Especially when you're dealing with the bazaar and shopping areas and all of that. There are too many things, and uh, you might get carried away by other sounds. So how do you? So our idea was to be close with this character and to hear sounds that he hears perhaps in his immediate vicinity, and so we adopted a technique which is rarely used nowadays. So we designed the whole film in mono. We recorded in mono and we designed the film in mono. So what you hear is a mono soundtrack. So it's not a 5.1 soundtrack and all that. So the whole choice of working in a mono format is quite different, because just like your visual aspect ratio choice, the choice of mono takes away a lot of distractions. You are not always filling the soundtracks and putting up everything, and you don't have to fill spaces that is elsewhere and all that, because there are too many sounds. We wanted to kind of carefully compose the ambient sounds also in a way that you kind of perceive things around the character, whether it is inside the house, it's Iqbal sounds, or inside the shop, it's we thought that kind of. And also, if you look at the film in a theater, I mean, in the computer it wouldn't make sense, because it's all stereo. The computer video audio is all stereo. But in a theatrical atmosphere, when it's a 4:3 film, it's a square, and on the left and right it's just black. So where the left and right speakers are kept, there is no image and there is nothing to perceive. So it makes even a logical sense to feel a 4:3 film in mono. So there's only the center speaker at work. So just like how we are following the character visually, the sound also complements that centric visualness of the film, because it comes from the center speaker. So we thought that could, and these are techniques, and that we thought it could kind of bring out some nuances of the experience of feeling the narrative.
Yeah, it's a stunning choice. So you talk about, Joan of Arc as being kind of the primary influence, but there are some really classical neorealist moments in the film. I think, just sort of the beat by beat of trying to get rid of those suits at the school, which is like just this tragic, situation. And then just like the waiting for the lunch and all these like little trivial things that he comes up against that are just like, if he could only just get through his day. But I wanted you to talk about the school in particular, because it seemed like this was a very specific kind of university culture, and we were seeing kind of have and have nots, and just curious about you discussing the university in particular.
Yeah, so the actual short story in itself had around 8 to 10 scenes. Okay, and then in the film I had written 40 scenes. So there are a lot of few things that I made up, and also few things that I borrowed from the writer's other stories, because most of his stories are about working class men from around the place. So the writer of the short story was himself a salesman when he was younger. He only studied until class 4. He never had a proper education. He was just doing odd jobs in different shops, and then later he was not even from our language. He's a Gujarati actually, but his family migrated to Tamil Nadu like a century ago, and they've always been living. So he learned our language by this thing, and he started writing stories. So since he's from a very lower middle class, working class community, he had this. Most of his stories have very interesting moments about working class life. So the scene of the school scene where NASIR goes to drop lunch to his employee's son is from us. It's like a small moment from a different short story which I developed into this film, and also where he goes to drop the one you mentioned, the blazers, the coats to the college boys, hostel boys. So that is also from a different short story. So I thought these moments could enhance our protagonist's world, because that is what he would also perhaps do. So taking inspirations from the source material, kind of imagining, because since even in our school, like my mom was also working, so most of the time she'd make breakfast and lunch for us in the morning, pack it into tiffin box and give it to us, and she would go to school, and me and my brother also would go. But in a lot of houses, they have the luxury of their mother cooking hot food in the afternoon and sending the food with someone, and so some of my friends would get their food like hot right 5 minutes before the lunch break, and it would be delivered to them by their house help or somebody. So that was something that we thought could be brought into this film, and also the hostel life of I went to an engineering college from where I dropped out, so I didn't graduate or anything. So, but I was in a residential university in hostel, and hostel life has its own charm, and so I thought, right, whatever hostel things that you see in the film are how our hostel was also. So we brought all of these kind of experiences, personal experience, a little bit into the film, which is that is why I like the short story, because you could relate with it so much that you could also bring in your parts of your world into the film's world.
Yeah, it's really, really wonderful. So
the name of the author is Dilip Kumar. Sorry, I see a question where Dilip Kumar is the name of the author.
So you're making films sort of in Tamil Nadu, and I'm curious what the filmmaking scene is there for, like, what is it like for indie filmmakers making film in your region, and what is it like exhibiting your work internationally? I know you've had a couple films at Rotterdam, and they're touring the world. So I'm curious what your experience has been like.
So Tamil Nadu, the interesting thing is that, or the bad thing is that we never had a tradition of the so-called alternate filmmaking or art filmmaking, or whatever you call it. We never had the tradition. Our neighboring states always had, right from 60s, there used to be filmmakers. Every decade, you'd have these amazing filmmakers who would make these interesting films. But our industry was primarily based on popular cinema, and there have been good films and filmmakers in the popular cinema realm and mainstream films, but never an independent wave per se. So what we've been experiencing in the last 10 years is good, because there have been 2-3 filmmakers who've like come and made films, 1 or 2 independent films, and those films have been shown outside. In fact, the sad thing is that my film and also our friends' film, independent films from Tamil, are more shown outside, because since there is no ecosystem in our industry to accommodate these new films, or there never was an ecosystem, we are only now starting to talk to distributors, and who, for them it's new. Like, what are these films? Why should we show this? Because all our films are hero-centric, they are highly melodramatic, and they need to have all sorts of things that you watch in a mainstream film. So it's a little difficult, because our of course, it was possible for me to make this film because of support from film festivals and grants and co-production funds and all that. Because otherwise, it would not just have been possible from local Tamil Nadu funding alone. Because since there was no ecosystem, producers don't find a way to make the money back, or they don't know how to invest in these films, and they're still insecure about embracing this cinema. But then this whole exposure to these international film festivals, personally for me, it has been Rotterdam, who'd been supporting from my first film, with writing for my second film, and production grants. And also we went there to do the post-production. So I stayed a few months in Amsterdam to do the sound and the color correction. So that's been a great leap of support from their end, because I could not have found that support because we don't have the concept of state funding for films. That never exists. There is a central funding system, which is also now defunct. So there is no funds that we could approach locally. So it's all private equity. So it's kind of difficult. But now I think with more independent films being made and more Tamil films getting wider kind of acclaim and reception. In fact, my film has been released in Netherlands in more than 20-30 screens in theaters, but it's never been released in Tamil Nadu. So Tamil people have still not seen it, apart from the odd festival screening or from an online screening or something. So that is a little sad and frustrating for me, because I primarily make it for, you make it for everybody, but you just want primarily to show to your people and then branch out. But it's not the other way. You show it outside first and come back, for which also you're accused, because they say that you make films for others, which is not the case. But yeah.
It's a very similar situation in the US, as I'm sure you've heard, that the independent cinema here is not very supported, and we don't have state funding either. So we're in the same boat with independent cinema. Yeah. But I want to. I know there are lots of questions, so Ananya, if you wanted to jump in, we can get some of these audience questions before we have to go to the next one.
Thank you, Holly and Arun, for that wonderful conversation. And we do just have half an hour before our next screening, so I think maybe in the interest of time, we're just going to take a couple of questions from the audience, and then we're going to throw everybody back into the table mode, so that you can Arun, maybe if you can hang around there and then you can answer the questions from the audience.
Yeah, I'll hang around in
just,
the lobby
just
for a
hop
while,
around. I think that might be easiest. We'll take one question from Christina. I think you were just on, Christina, if you want to turn on your mic and camera. Yep.
Absolutely. My question was about the ending scene, and less sort of what happened, but more how long you stayed there. So the length of the scene. At first, you're shocked by the mob, and then there's just this silence. And then I was really uncomfortable because it lasted longer than I thought, like I was expecting credits. And then I was confused, is my computer frozen? Is it supposed to be this way? Why are we staying here so long? And then that sort of left space for my brain to kind of finally quiet down and become incredibly sad. And so my question is, did you test that with audiences? Did you test it with yourself? Did you try different lengths? And was there some sort of, almost scientific process to figuring out exactly how long you could make your audience uncomfortable before they got sad?
That's a good point to raise, Christina. But I think you had the answer in your question itself, where that whole time that we spent there was to reflect on what just happened. Because I understood that it could come as a shock to a lot of people that you watched this person for about 78 minutes or 77 minutes, and then suddenly this happens, and what just happened is something not just to people from my immediate culture, but to everybody. It could come as a shock, and I thought everybody needs some time to reflect, because in the original short story, after NASIR is hit on the head and he's lying down, in the second person, the author describes as, you are not thinking about your adopted son Iqbal, you are not thinking about your wife, you are not thinking about your colleagues, and you're not thinking about your mother. Before you could think all of them up, you just breathe your last breath or something. And I found this particular paragraph very evocative, and it says a lot. But how do I say this visually? I can't go to flash cuts and flashbacks and show everybody's face. And then, so I thought, let me use time to kind of extend thoughts, and so I knew, and that's a part of process of being a filmmaker, right? During the editing process, you imagine, and you can only imagine it. Not, you can never be certain, but you can only imagine that the audience would feel the same way that you would feel. So when I was watching, in fact, we didn't spend a lot of time. Our editor, Argo Basu, he also very perceptive, and he told me, Arun, actually, the interesting part is, I'll come down to the answer. We kind of almost retained the exact time that we rolled for that shot. Okay, so when we were rolling that shot in actual shooting spot, we were just looking at what the next shot of, we just put him there, and then we were rolling, and then we were looking at it, and we were thinking, okay, look at him, like he's lying down like a dog, and we were looking, and for a while we were thinking about our own things and how would we perceive it and all that, and we cut. And then when we put it back on our timeline, and Argo just made a small adjustment to its rhythm, and then we felt that, okay, this, and he said, like, Arun, we are not touching this time. This is something that some people might tell you that they are bored after a point and all that, but don't worry about those people. This is the point where you use time really perceptively, where you make people think, and it is for people who will think and take the thoughts back after the film. And so I think that was why the long take was like that, to enable some thoughts about what just happened. And you were right in getting it, so I'm glad.
Yeah, I think it worked really well. Thank you, Arun. I think so. What we'll do now is, maybe if you can hang out at table number 1, and please feel free to join Arun, and make there are a lot of people who want to meet you and talk with you. So yeah, definitely just make sure to give space to other attendees as well. Okay, thanks, guys. We'll head back to the floor now.
Thanks
Bye.
so much.
Bye. Thank you everyone. Thank you, Holly.
Thank you so much, Holly.